Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. This is part 9. If you haven't seen the other 8, that's most unfortunate, but you should be able to persevere without any problem, because today I'm going to do a tiny micro recap. Guess what? There's these things called Gibborim. Comes out of the Sword of Awesomeness. If you haven't read it, it would behoove you. There's more stories of exceptionalism in the scriptures than anywhere ever. True story. You can look into it and you will find stuff in there that is so jaw-droppingly unbelievable, you're probably not going to believe it. Like, not actually believe it. Most people have really not serious unction in their gumption to believe the stories that are written in there as history. As that dude really did throw a stick in a river and an iron axe head floated to the surface. That's pretty awesome, right? Haven't you ever tried that? Because it's not done that once for me. Except a time where I wrote a testimony about it in a book, Snatched from the Flames. Feel free to check that out. You can pray prayers like that, and you can see wild and crazy things happen, like even animals speaking if need be, because sometimes there's swords, angels, and unbelievably stubborn humans. Yep, not the donkey, mind you. The donkey was not the stubborn one in that story. That's called Balaam. If you haven't read Numbers, I believe 22, 23, all up in there. If you haven't read Numbers recently, I'm sorry for your soul, because it would feed you all kinds of things beyond statistics. Did any of you take statistics? That was a nightmare, right? I'm not trying to dissuade you from taking statistics. I'm just trying to dissuade you from paying money to have someone treat you like an Egyptian slave for a while. That's what statistics was to me. But it did give me the ability to read research and understand what it was saying without the biases of well-marketed industrial psychological operations. Yes, there's people whose full-time job, it's called an industrial psychologist, is to sell you anything. Maybe not just sell you, make you believe it, want it, own it, need it. I get distracted. They're not as much the Gibborims, right? But all throughout time, there's been people who have been mighty, people who have done such valiant and exceptional things, they're remembered. And even if it's not necessarily their name that's remembered, it is the acts, the deeds that they did are remembered. Because when I ask people, tell me about some mighty people in the scriptures, and you know what they tend to say? The story, not necessarily even the name, because there's this mighty man, we're going to get to him later, in the scripture, who for the entire history of my known life since I read about this story has been seared into my mind as like the definition of manliness. And it's definitely not going to look like the Hollywood version of Hercules or some other Nephilim. Also a Gibborim, just a different kind. Total open rebellion versus walking in brutal vulnerability, honesty, transparency, and deep broken spirit and heartedness, serving his king of redemption. That tends to be the balancing of the acts between whether or not you are righteous or wicked. Tends to be the fruit you produce. But that being said, there was a guy, a human, remember, not hybrid. It says he went down into a pit with a lion on a snowy day and slew him. The first time, like, let's just actually think about that. Why would that be like the thing that I remember all my life? Because haven't you ever wondered what it'd be like mano a mano, you versus the lion? I think about these things regularly. I think about, do you think he was armed? Do you think he was armed? Do you think he took down into the pit with the lion armor? Like, what kind of armor would you choose? Leather? Because Hollywood has sold us that scheme for a long time. Would you wear your linen clothing? Because linen is outrageously effective against moderate slashing attacks in layers. And it's also just a good blanket. I think people were practical who were living on the run. I don't think they were as tactical when they were living on the run. Because the truth is, most mighty people are not tactical. They're just humans living and walking out a way of walking that makes them strange, that makes them set apart, like outside of the confines of the normal systems of what the world is doing at the current time. Like, I don't think there was a lot of guys, by the way, Benaya, I don't think there was a lot of guys going down into pits with lions on snowy days, but maybe there were some. And maybe that was a way of knowing, then I knew I was a man as mighty as my captain David. Because David obviously has slain lions and bears, and we know that, right? So maybe he's just kind of just checking, do I got the chutzpah? Do you ever wonder if you have the chutzpah? Do you ever know what it'd be like if you were tested? Actually tested, not just the I'm going to rant for a moment. If you want, you can skip ahead 45 to 3.5 hours, depending on where this one goes. The modern scholastic indoctrination system is a very effective tool at making individuals think in a set of pre-authorized options, right? You took those tests in school. Didn't you want to just sometimes light fires to the desk and walk out a little bit? Just a little bit. My friends and I discovered hand gel, like the hand sanitizer people are price gouging out there for outrageous sums to poison themselves as they wipe themselves clean of diseases and stuff. There's like medicine that God made. It's called plants. Look it up. It requires zero poison. Some of it can absolutely end your soul if you eat it in any kind of quantities. They're little berries and stuff like that. Monk's Hood. Look into that one. That one's a decadent, violet, beautiful purple thing. Horrible nightmare if you eat it or reduce it down into a cocktail and turn it into a poison. Not a good idea. But there's medicines out there that are way better. But if you go through the modern scholastic system, you're liable to get indoctrinated to believe that plants are poison somehow, more so than any of the food at all we eat. They're trying to convince us the food is not healthy, and the white poison powder that comes in capsules marked side effect warning, 42 potential side effects that will be detrimental to your health. But we assure you, this is a remedy. This is a treatment, And the reason we all kind of go along with that system is because we went to school where we got taught a way of thinking in order to respond correctly for the praise of men at the end of the day. Our teachers, our parents, or everybody else who says, way to go, good job going to school. There's a school out there called life that they definitely didn't prepare almost any of us for, right? How much time in your entire scholastic career, if you're just a young lad, a wee one, skipping rocks on rivers still and just crushing life with enthusiasm, or if you're, a bitter, miserable teenager who is just thinking the world is miserable and lonely and you're depressed and frustrated with all the arrogance of the parents around you, wherever you may be, or if you've been in school since you can remember, wherever you may fall in that, how much serious time in your scholastic career was devoted to how to sleep effectively, how to sleep well, how to eat well, actually how to go to a store, price check, not be manipulated by clever marketing, just to go to a store and purchase quality food and ingredients, how to prepare quality meals on a budget, how to actually eat and clothe yourself with quality fabrics and clothing that are still worthwhile instead of being fed by the consumerism trap. I mean, there's so much of your life that you just didn't get taught unless you had a parent, right? Unless you had a mentor, someone who came along in your life who taught you those skills. You didn't learn that at school, right? You definitely learned what the corporate classes do. You learned where the cliques were. You learned all these other skills that were totally worthless, and all they did was genuinely probably bring you a lot of frustration, agony, and disability to be effective later in life. We're still trying to clean the gunk off of high school, some of us out there, because it was just filthy. I, as a junior in high school, elected to sign away my soul, body, and every bit of my DNA into the United States Army. And I became emancipated to the US of A. So I started out my junior year normal, obviously born inside a Luciferian bloodline and psychopathic pedophiles everywhere. That's a longer story for a different video. Feel free to click into any of those. I've got a lot of variety of content, if you can't know, on my channel. So anytime you would like to, it's there. That being said, I then jumped into the military. And then when I came back after basic combat training, where I just spent 3.5 months being trained how to murder people effectively, no matter what kind of situation I was in, I was not the same as the students around me. So I was bored all the time. I was the worst kind of senior in your classroom. I tended to lead people astray, not necessarily into bad things like rabble-rousing and hoodlism. Like, I wasn't necessarily a hoodlum. I was just bored because I was just trained to be a warrior, and then someone sat me in front of a desk. I had classes weeks before, sitting in that classroom, staring at screens, watching people literally get shot just for hours. They had us do this on medical training day, right? Where you're seeing different kinds of horrifically graphic wounds and how they're inflicted, by the way, and also how much damage a human body can withstand and keep going. Sincerely, there is more capacity in a human to persevere than you probably have ever thought real. Because I watch videos of guys getting sawed open. Not all the way, not graphically necessarily all the time, just shot a lot. And they just kept going for long periods of time, uncomfortable periods of time. Sometimes those guys lived. And it makes no sense. It really doesn't. Because movies have ruined your soul and given you they've captured your imagination in so many just absolutely devastatingly false ways. Like the action scenes. Where sometimes guys punch each other in the jaw space with soft, dusty knuckles for inordinate periods of times, and nobody seems to mind using their hands for a month afterwards. Because I punched a tree one time, not out of anger. I just happened to be swinging my fist very quickly in a general direction of a tree and connected viscerally with it. Did you know that's kind of like a bone? Yeah, they're real. Your knuckles are very tiny, and they lose to bigger bones like forehead faces most frequently. So the edge of the palm, son. I don't want to teach you too much more than that. Keep that thumb locked out. Yeah, I got another gnarly gash. Shocker, I go outside. I live vibrantly, and I dig castles and moats with my child. I tend to get injured when I'm hanging out with her because she's fantastic. But knife hands, son. Let me teach you that. Keep that thumb locked out there because remember fascia? We talked about that earlier. It's a whole system inside your body that makes you limbery at times and makes you springy like a kangaroo and can give you endurance like a kangaroo. Did you know that kangaroos are genuinely more efficient when they're running at full speed? Just think about that. They're exhausted sitting down. But suddenly when they loosen up and start going 40 miles an hour, maybe 40 kilometers an hour, maybe 40 miles an hour, I forget. There's a lot of Australians out there who will correct me quickly on this one. Do. I would love those comments on kangaroos. They run at an unbelievable pace for ongoing periods of times, crossing deserts at full sprint, coolly, calmly, collectedly. They have a tradition of awesome in my book. So I went and pet kangaroos last year. You can look at our Freedom Road video. Freedom Road. Yes, Freedom Road video. They're incredible creatures, and I got to look one in the eyes. And it's important. If you haven't looked a creature in the eye today, you should find one and look it in the eye. See something amazing, complex, and more unique than anything man's destructively augmented version will ever produce, because the creator of life is spectacular. But those systems of schooling, right? I got ensnared in that. To me, the school one I was in for a long time, even going into college and beginning to take tests that had monumentally big effects on my grade and my general disposition, I learned a lesson in there that you don't really think as critically as you think you do. I studied philosophy for a good long amount of time, which meant I wrote a lot of papers. And during that time, I talked and thought and reasoned often, and I had to learn about critical thinking in a different way. And then I was at the same time trying to study learning, like psychological learning, how it happens bodily and just in people? How is memory encoded? I was on a quest to try to understand what in the world had happened to me and to the people all around me. And because of that, I learned how easily seduced people are by information and by false information and by presupposition, by not utilizing analysis. And I saw it because I was in classrooms where I still had to just fill in the bubble with the number 2 pencil and not go too far beyond the line, lest your score be diminished tremendously. Those tests taught me all of the wrong kinds of lessons that I needed to know about being a mighty person. And I don't mean that to offend every person in the room who's a good instructor. I mean that to offend the system. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm always trying to differentiate between systems and individuals, because individuals, no matter where you are, can become mighty. This is always what I'm trying to get at here in every one of these videos, is to remind you personally, individuals said that I am pointing at now with my finger, you, that there is nothing that can keep you from being mighty except the man in the mirror and the beast system we've all been really deeply born into since the day we were born. Look at the dragon next to my face. That's the one. He's called the dragon, the devil, that serpent of old. He's the twisted, crooked serpent. If you don't know about him, read The Sword of Awesome, because it's from the beginning, like Genesis 3. Guess what? Bad dude shows up on the scene and gets all the way down till Revelation at the very end, like 12. And it goes all the way from the beginning to the end. We got to talk about the pierced hand who crushes the head of the serpent. Yep. There's the mightiest of all the men. And we get to talk about the fire the serpent breathes out, because he's trying to consume every single one of us into a way of thinking that makes us not mighty, that makes us afraid of pits and lions. Yes, you're afraid of pits and lions because someone ruins you at some point to thinking that that was not a good idea. I'm not saying it's always a good idea to go into a pit with a lion. I just think if that ever was opportunity was offered to me, I would most assuredly seize upon it with due haste. And I think you ought to as well, because you've got lions in pits all around you. It's called marketing. It's called advertisement. It's called water, like your tap water. Yep, that's a pit full of lions, because people in, like, my family's heraldry decided hydrofluorosilicic acid and unbelievable amounts of other chemicals were a good idea to feed perpetually through the waste organs of our bodies, so that we could filter out the very toxic byproducts of aluminum production. Like Reynolds wrap, wonderful choice for covering your food, terrible choice for eating its byproducts every time you take a drink of water. So consider it not a good move. So face that lion, and most likely just the pride of thinking I've been deceived. That tends to be the only reason people don't actually look at any of these things I'm talking about. But what's interesting is all these people suddenly are humbled and forced to live in their houses as voluntary prisoners all of a sudden. So I hope you watch this or share it with them, because maybe they need to know this. But I'm going to get to 1 Samuel in just a moment. I just need you to understand something. Those mighty people who you could be at any time, you valiant ones, if you would be willing to violently seize the opportunities that you have been entrusted with to destroy the strongholds of the dragon. Oh, I don't know how to point behind me yet. This way. The dragon, if you could learn how to genuinely seize those opportunities to destroy where those have built up their strongholds in your life, you can be a different person, so that when you are tested, when you're actually tested, what will come out of you will not be more dragon speak, will not be cowardice, will not be literally running away. Because we're going to read about when it's a good idea to run away, but we're also going to read about when it's a good idea to not trust the fear in your guts. Because the mighty men, but not the stud with the sword, we all think about David. He's awesome, right? He's so fearless. Yes. And the mighty men later who are going to slay sometimes giants. There's a lot more dudes who killed giants later on with huge spears, massive spears. Spears that are so big, you and I personally would call them, well, if you went to a museum, say, and ever saw a specimen of one of these giant swords or spears, they would say, this was used for religious ceremonies only. What the heck does that mean? Religious ceremonies only? Have you ever picked up a sword in your life and tried to cut the head of another man off with it? You'll take anything in the room, especially the super nice, awesome giant sword for my giant six-fingered hands. I think this is how they hide plain evidence directly in plain sight. Just a little side note. But that being said, there is so much incredible overcoming about to happen because these mighty men that we read about later who kill like 300 people with just the stick in their hand almost. Yeah, all these mighty men who save David or who infiltrate, go behind enemy lines silently like a gazelle and sneak up directly next to King Saul's head and take his own spear from him. Oh, it's also the slumber of the living God that comes upon him and can make your enemies sleep so soundly you could kick them in the throat and they wouldn't even know it. True story. You can literally sneak by people because the slumber of the living God is on them and they would never know it. In case you may need to know that, if you're ever on the run, the physical run, or just the actually running with your foot space, if you ever need to, you can pray to the living God and he would put slumber on your enemies. So powerful, no matter what they are. I think even maybe a drone. You ever seen a computer have a malfunction in your life? I know everyone's mortified by the perfectly marketed super control state of mass surveillance and all this other stuff that's going to control every aspect of our lives. Yeah, they have glitches, folks, just as much as your phone does. Sometimes far more, because if you didn't know about hard drives, you should study hard drives. They don't keep all the data. It's called corruption. You ever go to click on a picture and it says file not found or damaged, and then it's gone, right? Welcome to reality, where our disk drives are outrageously deplorable in their ability to hold information for long periods of time. So think about that next time you're worried about all of your communications and everything in the history of your life being downloaded into some vault in Utah. Dadgum. Why do the people in Utah always have to keep all the genealogical records and every record and category on man? There's a lot of Luciferian organizations and families and religions out there that like to keep track of that stuff. But the living God could, supernaturally defragment any of that stuff or cause it to just have a terrible day and not be able to find you if it didn't need to. You know what I mean? So tuck that away for whatever it's worth. I had a conversation with someone recently where they needed to remember that, and it's okay. You got to be all right. Remember, living God, magnets with ones and zeros on them. Spears, maybe. All right. We're going to jump in here because let's do that. If you didn't know where we were, we're in 1 Samuel because we're reading through the mighty men. This is some of the mighty men. We also talked about Esther a little bit last week or yesterday, whatever time zone you read this from. But today we are in 1 Samuel 23. Let's jump in, shall we? They then told David, saying, "Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are plundering the threshing floors." So David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And Yahweh said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the ranks of the Philistine?" Valid question, y'all. If you're in a good, safe, semi-safe stronghold and you're still scared, it's generally not a good idea to run off and go start a war in another town. I think this is in Judah. I don't know for certain. I should have done a little more research ahead of time. But they want to then go somewhere else and make war with the Philistines to try to deliver another house of Israel, another tribe of individuals in their little town. But what in the world? These guys are afraid. Yes, these are the mighty men, and they're totally afraid right now. And that's okay. You got to hear me. If you ever need to actually face battle of any kind, just like the one with the man in the mirror and your strongholds of addictions that may be rampantly raging and destroying everyone in your life, including yourself. Yeah, that one. The ones you're afraid to touch with a 10-foot pole. Any one of those. Just pick one. I bet I could find them in 5 minutes of sitting down and talking to you. And then we could address that. But I don't do as much of that counseling as I used to because, listen, you got to get ready for war. And this is how you do it, right? So equip yourself. Gird up your loins, son. We're going to talk some fear talk now. I cannot stress this enough. You're going to be afraid. Mighty men are afraid. Mighty, valiant women are absolutely terrified. Mighty and the most courageous of children are totally mortified and full of fear. Listen, that's not what makes the mighty person a coward or fail in their task. It is about the one who perseveres until the end shall surely receive the crown of life that's been promised to him. That's what we're holding on to. This is an endurance game, y'all. It is not about like a one quick awesome moment where someone stepped up and did something brave one time when it was easy. This is about ongoing perpetual conquering of the fears that are so perpetually plaguing us. Because that's what plagues us all, really. At the end of the day, deep-seated fears that drive us. That's what the enemy camp wants to do sincerely, is to propel us and to keep us back. Adam in the garden was apathetic. He was indifferent to the destruction that was sitting right in front of him. He was passive in a moment where he needed to be fierce. He was the one who should have crushed the head of the serpent when it ever tempted them to transgress, to disobey and dishonor the one who'd created him. He should have done that. Instead, all of the massive horrors of the world have been playing out ever since because that wasn't addressed properly. Fear causes us. The fear of going forth and delivering other people is sincerely put there by the enemy to keep us from being the mighty person we are. We can at any time choose to become a double agent to that fear and instead fear only one. Fear one who has the authority, all authority. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to the Messiah, to the Redeemer, and he bestows, he gives us that in his name if we would yet call on him. So David does just that. David does exactly what a good leader does. And that's, you know what? Not condemn his men for the fear that was in their hearts. He sought the Father who could drive fear out of his men's hearts in a moment with a word. That's smart. That's tactically sound advice, okay? So this is what David does. Then David inquired of Yahweh once more, and Yahweh answered him and said, "Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, and he led away their livestock and struck them with a great slaughter. Thus David delivered the inhabitants of Keilah. See, David went back for some confirmation from his commander. If you don't know about the captain of the heavenly host, it would behoove you to read Joshua because it's outrageous, especially the first few chapters. You need to know there's a commander of the heavenly hosts. Yeah, I believe it's the one with the pierced hand who has the rod of iron, comes back next time, leading the heavenly host on a white horse, that one. He met with Joshua, and Joshua bowed down to him and worshipped him. But if this was just a normal angel, every angel normally rebuked men who worshipped them and said, worship only the living God. That's a good way to test whether that angel is a servant of the living God or just a serpent shape-shifting in your midst. Remember, the old dragon can transform himself into an angel of light. So don't marvel, like marvel not. Why is Marvel the billion-dollar stronghold it is? Pretty sure they're telling you mighty Gibborim stories, but not from the good camp. Anyways, David most assuredly here does the right thing. He inquires of the living God. He seeks the authority and a better word. And you know what it does? Gives him confirmation. Because you can actually pray to the living God anytime. Like you have an actual pass. You have a standing order that is always giving you the opportunity to go have a conversation with the King of the earth. That's a pretty big opportunity that most of us just squander on things like wasting our time doing other things that don't actually matter near as much. If you turned off your television completely, your phone, all of it, turned off everything but you praying or reading your Bible for 40 days, for 40 days. Could you actually not listen to another human speaking besides the people that are directly in your ear space for 40 days? Can you do that? You should probably do that now before it was taken from you and you withdrew like an addict. Really, I used to work in the mental health field. There's a huge arena now, which is called technology addiction, where we had to go and work in places in the wilderness where there was no Wi-Fi. There was no Wi-Fi and cell signal or anything like that. We just were back in the national forest on some old private land that built a refuge, really, for people to come and decompress as well as systematically recover from being in a deeper wilderness where you were just living in a tent, and then kind of have a step down program. So that place, I literally saw people detox from technology. They had to detoxify themselves because they'd taken in so much screen time. Their body physically withdrew. Your body will physically withdraw if all you've ever been doing for the last few years of your life is entertaining yourself, even if you were just on the hunt for the truther campaign. Any one of these is super critical for you to figure out that it's still a major system that you need to be very cautious with using in high doses. It's hard to undo it. If you've just been dosing yourself perpetually and suddenly you stop, it's really hard. So I challenge you sincerely, try 40 days without it. Try 40 days without any other influence beside the people around you, the Word of God, and the people you physically talk to on the phone. It would really be beneficial for your soul. That being said, David inquires of the living God because he's praying, and he also, come to find out, has an ephod and a high priest now in his camp. Remember, go back a little bit to the previous episode if you want to find out about that. But let's listen in. Now it came about when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David after the slaughter of his entire family and all of the priests of the Lord. Okay? They fled to David at Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. And when it was told to Saul that David had come to Keilah, Saul said, Yahweh has delivered him into my hand. For he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. So Saul summoned all the people for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. Now David knew that Saul was plotting evil, plotting a conspiracy against him. So he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. Then, jumped ahead. And so David said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, your servant has heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down just as your servant has heard? O Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. And Yahweh said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And Yahweh said, they will surrender you. Then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. They bugged out, most certainly right here, wherever they could, because it tends to be a good idea to spread out at about that point. When it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit. That's a good bug out plan, by the way. Sometimes you just got to inquire of the Father most sincerely with everything in you. Pray and seek the Father. If you need to know if you should stay somewhere, if you should go somewhere at any time from now till the day you die, you should be inquiring with regularity on what you should be doing with your time, because the days are sincerely evil. You understand this, right? If you don't, they're exposing the radical evil that has been plaguing the world since the history of mankind. Now, more than ever, it is so readily available and unconcealed because we're going through revelations, not necessarily the big capital T tribulations yet. but we are going through revelation. That means the unveiling, folks. Revelation it's the revealing. Ultimately, it will be the revealing of Jesus, the Christ, Yeshua, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. That's who it's revealing. But before that, you see, BC, right now, they're revealing the beast. They're going to ensnare everybody who openly, at the end of it, will want to worship him. It's an incredibly brilliant strategy, and it's been dark side prophesied for a long time in a bad way. And they've been advancing that agenda beyond generations and generations. So this is going to continue in a serious way. But during that, amidst that, you have an opportunity to be learning the most powerful revelation of your life, which is how to move with unction in your gumption, how to be a mighty person, how to contend against it. Because it says in Scripture that when the enemy, when the dragon, when any of his cohorts, when all of them come in like a flood, like an actual flood. If you've ever been in front of a flood, it's nightmaric. It is thunderous. It is tree snapping, bridge destroying, people, house, entire community drowning, catastrophic nightmare. It is unstoppable. It really is. That's the point of a flood. Remember Genesis 6, where the Gibborim were first the heroes of old, the Hercules, all those cyclopean atrocities, that kind of world system was destroyed. They themselves, in all their supra-advanced technology, could not hide themselves from the flood. Their chambers and such things, they left stones behind, a lot of rocks. They became a lot of rocks in a sense. Really, petrification. Look into it. Muddy, bad, burying them, fossils. Anyways, I love fossils. I'm a fan of them. You should study them. But they were destroyed, utterly destroyed. But this is a time where we have the opportunity to seek with diligence the word of the Father at any time we want. We can seek him with all our heart. It says in James 1, you should read it right immediately, because I shouldn't have to read everything for you, nor should anybody. If you're coming to me for a vitamin, here's a supplement, son. Go eat the meat. Okay. It says clearly, if you, any man, any individual, whoever needs wisdom, he should ask the Father, who gives generously, but he should not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a double-minded man. It's like a ship being tossed about in the sea. Throw a boat in the flood next time and see how that goes. Oh, wait. Only one boat of all of the boats in the world made it. You don't think other people built boats, you guys, for the flood to try to hide from it? They knew it was coming. They knew it was inevitable. This time, they know it's inevitable. So they've been building tunnels, massive quantities of tunnels. If you don't know about that, good gracious, read your Bible. Revelation. Just go read it. Actually read it. Have you read Revelation? It will bring you a blessing. Because there's this thing called the seals of the living God that are sealing up this book, and the Lamb of God is the only one who has the worthiness to open them. And there's this seal called the sixth seal, where a great and massive earthquake that is so cataclysmically horrific, it moves every mountain and island. Moves them. Yikes. People, though, the kings of the earth, the Gibborim, the mighty men, the heroes, the giant bad guys too, young, old, rich, slave, poor, free, they hide themselves in the tunnels, in the caves of the rocks. So these are deep underground military bases, but just deep tunnels, just tunnels. I grew up in a community in Colorado where it's nothing but tunnels everywhere, because it's called the continuity of government. If you aren't aware of it, this is where everybody goes, like the kings of the earth that flee and hide themselves from the wrath of the one who is coming. Yikes. They're going to try to hide themselves under the ground, because all of the upper ground's going to move and shake and tremble and fall around. And so they think for certain we'll be good down here in these tunnel spaces. Probably not a good idea, because last I checked, rock moves underground just as much as it moves above ground, son. I know if you think you're sitting on the basalt shield. See, the reason people in Colorado, most people may not know this, people in Colorado live next to what's called this shield. Like literally, it's a giant rock. It's just a massive rock underground that is not moved, as far as they know, for millions of days or years, or just a long time as far as their faulty scientific instruments and garbage indoctrination will teach them. It just doesn't move, okay? It's a huge rock, like massive, like huge counties and state-sized big rocks out there. And they don't move. It's why there's giant mountains near it and then none in front of it. It's an interesting place. So because of that, they're pretty convinced that when the earth shakes, they can have tunnels, like massive tunnels, that will help to keep them safe. So if you bore into that rock and just tunnel out that entire area, you can look into communities like Parker out there. There's like all these little communities just near Denver. Denver, right? DIA, the Denver International Airport Conspiracy. Yeah, those kinds of places. Well, there's entire mountain complexes and tunnels that go from the entire Front Range all the way out and extending about 60, sometimes much further, miles east of there. But that's why they do that, because they do know there's going to be massive cataclysms that are inevitable, and they try to hide themselves from the wrath of the one who is coming, but also maybe just from their enemies, whatever they've been deceived into doing, because most people that do that kind of work just do it in a compartmentalized fashion. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, because my job is just to build holes, or I just refurnish offices underground, and it's all the same. It really just looks like normal buildings and stuff. But this is why I'm always talking to you about shields and swords and spears for tunnel talk, because what if someday you maybe had to go in there, I don't know, and root them out, because you're supposed to? Here's what I'm trying to raise up if you didn't know it. You ever read Jeremiah? Probably not. Some of you, yes. Well, I read it pretty much every single day. There's reasons for that, because some of us, I think, are just here to warn against mass calamities and violence for seasons of our life. And it's really helpful to hear about other people that get so persecuted, they're beaten and thrown in slaves and that kind of stuff. But if you haven't read Jeremiah, it would behoove you. Ooh, let's see, where is it? Uh-oh. Oh, just lost it. Sorry, y'all. I'm using a new Bible. If you don't know what that's like, breaking in a new sword. I'm still trying to sharpen myself with it. Dadgummit, I lost it. Needless to say, if you want to know where the whole fishing for men came from and why they call them, why did when Jesus talked to people and said, come and fish for men, you're fishing for fish. Stop it. Come and follow me, and I will teach you how to fish for the souls of men. Well, in Jeremiah, there's a prophecy about that. Literally, that's what they're going to do initially. It says in those first days, basically, they will go fish for the hearts of men and the souls of men. But then it says, and then in the later days, then he will send out hunters. What? Hunters? Yes. Yahweh says he's going to send out hunters who will hunt them from every crag in the rock, every tunnel, and every place that they've hid themselves. They will root them out. Yeah, actually root them out. So I think when I read the Great Commission, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Genesis, Exodus, the whole Bible, right? The commission of the living God, read it. It says, go into all the nations, all the world, all of it, every cosmos, all the cosmos, and preach the good news to every creature. I think some of us actually have to go to every portion of the earth to preach the good news. And I don't think people have been preaching it as much down below us. I don't. Most of what I learn about from the underground is naughtiness. It is the kingdom of the beast down there. And I think the good news still should be preached down there, and every one of them should have an equal opportunity to hear the good news. So that's kind of why I talk about a lot of this stuff. I don't know how I got off on that tangent per se, but some of you will figure out what I'm really getting at there. I think some of us are destined to be hunters who go root that stuff out, and that's okay, and that's wonderful, but we should probably prepare to be mighty now on the surface in case we ever should have to go rooting for tunnels and caves. But David, he and his men are going to go into caves often, and they're also at other times going to be fleeing in the caves and in the forests and all over the place, because that's what you got to do sometimes. And right now, some of you need to do that most seriously. Root out the garbage in your soul. Find those strongholds that don't belong to the King of Glory and root them out with violence. Do whatever it takes to seize upon those fear of men that you may have in your heart. David inquired of the Lord. He had confirmation, and his confidence was infectious. You see, men and women who are mighty are infectious just as much as those who are cowardly, because Phobos, right, the god of fear, the bad one, panic. These are like entities as much as they are anything else. And they have a spiritually transmitted disease that can really break forth, especially in times of testing and trial and tribulation. And those are deadly. They will kill you most certainly. And so if you've ever studied any kind of battle and why people win and why others lose, you're going to learn all about it there, because suddenly the fear takes over the enemies and they begin to flee rather than face. Those are very different positions, and why getting shot in the face is always ideal, because getting shot in the back is genuinely never going to happen if you always face the enemy. Do you get what I'm saying? We have all this armor that's offered to us forever, should we ask for it and walk in it. It doesn't come just by saying, I have the armor of God on my chest. It comes by living it, by walking in the authority. And wherever the blood of the enemies, filthy, defiling work has taken place in our life, I don't know that the armor of God is sitting as holy over that place. So you have to destroy that so you can bear up the armor, so that your identity becomes secure in the one who called you. And it will make you, it will transform you from who you are into who he is, and it will make you a new creature. You see, that creature is the mighty one who, after David, just like after David got done praying and he had confirmation from the Father, he went and acted immediately. And all those men who were with him followed their leader. So go be the leader. I don't care if you think you have very little influence in this world or in this system. You are the most strategically placed individual in the room. No matter what room you show up to or are called to, if you have the power of the living God with you, because you literally become an extension of his hand on this earth. So I pray you would be diligent to do that and to seize with every opportunity you have to take advantage of this time you've been entrusted and to go and find a way to be mighty no matter what the cost. Go be fierce for what you believe in. Go diligently root out the evil that's in your heart and your soul, and go figure out what it really takes to be tested by the living God so that your faith could grow and it could produce perseverance, powerful perseverance. We might, at the end of it, become perfected and complete, not lacking in nothing. That is what my prayer and my hope and my desire is for each and every one of you, and also that you would go find ways to make armor. Go find ways to make armor. If you didn't know what I was doing on Shabbat, because I enjoy the Sabbath most seriously. And I believe it's the time where you can have strategic downloads and information from your master and your king. I was studying armor as usual because I read the Bible, and every time I get stuck somewhere on a passage about armor, I just got to read about it for a while. So I did. And then that led me into corundum. If you guys haven't looked into corundum, it's like what sapphires and rubies come out of. It's the material, aluminum oxide and stuff like that. But I'm looking in ways that you can melt that down and weave it into a fiber. And then you know what? I discovered people have been melting down rock and making it an armor for a while. Like since the 60s. Ukraine, the Soviets had figured out a way to liquefy basalt and cast threads out of it. And they tried to then bind those onto different things like aircraft or other big tanks and cars and stuff like that. Anyways, people have been doing this a long time. So I think some of you out there can figure this out and figure out how to make us armor that can withstand 2,000 degree fire, just in case maybe that ever should happen, where you got fire-breathing dragons all around you and you got to deal with that sun. Maybe we need a good heat-resistant shield or fabric clothing, because I like linen and I like being cool. So anyways, I love you guys. I love you all. Be vigilant, be diligent, and of course, be safe out there. And by that, I mean live as dangerously as possible, because the days are sincerely evil. But you were born for such a time as this. I love you. Be steadfast always.